The cabinet door hit the frame so hard a coffee mug tipped off the counter and shattered across the kitchen floor. Leanne Harford didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway between the hallway and the kitchen with one hand pressed flat against the wall and the other resting on the curve of her belly, watching her husband Craig Mercer haul a duffel bag out of the bedroom closet, like the house was already on fire, and he was the only one who mattered. 6 months, she said. I'm 6 months pregnant, Craig. I know how far along you are. He didn't look at her. He pulled a stack of shirts from the shelf and pushed them into the bag without folding them. That's actually part of the problem. A problem, she said it flat, not a question. Leanne. He finally turned and his face had that look she'd started to recognize over the last year, the one that meant he'd already made the decision and was only explaining it to check a box. I can't do this. I can't do the mortgage and the daycare bills and your landscaping jobs that pay out $600 every 3 months. Those jobs are building a portfolio. I've told you that. You've been building a portfolio for 4 years. He zipped the bag. At some point, it's just a hobby. She felt the words land somewhere between her ribs. This baby isn't a hobby. I know that. He picked up the bag, picked up his keys, and paused at the kitchen doorway, like he was giving her a chance to say something that would change everything. She looked at him and saw nothing she recognized anymore. No guilt, no grief, just the restless, forward-leaning look of a man who had mentally moved out weeks ago. I'm sorry, he said. I genuinely am. But I'm not built for this. Not the baby, not the debt, not. He stopped. Didn't finish. Not me, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He just walked out, and the sound of the front door clicking shut was quieter than she expected, the way most devastating things are, in the end. His colleague Vanessa's apartment was 12 minutes away. Vanessa had a rooftop terrace, a wine rack that cost more than Leanne's car, and a history with Craig that Leanne had spent the last 8 months trying to convince herself was professional. She stopped convincing herself of that about 3 days before Craig started packing. Leanne stood in the kitchen for a long time after he left. She looked at the broken mug on the floor, the handle still intact. She thought about sweeping it up, then decided she'd do it in the morning. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and worked on a site proposal for a community garden in Barhaven until 2 in the morning. It was not a great proposal. It was the only thing she knew to do with her hands when the rest of her wanted to fall apart. She called her sister Darlene the next day. You're not staying in that house alone, Darlene said before Leanne had finished explaining. Pack what you need. I have the spare room. Darlene lived in Kanata, in a semi-detached with beige carpets and a baby gate still installed at the top of the stairs from when her youngest had been learning to walk. The spare room had a single bed, a window that looked out onto the neighbor's fence, and just enough space for a small desk if you angled it right. Leanne moved in on a Tuesday. She had 1 suitcase, her laptop, a box of drafting supplies, and $214 in her checking account. She told herself it was temporary. She told the baby the same thing, pressing her palm flat against her stomach in the dark of that narrow room, listening to the furnace tick. We're going to be fine, she said, more to hear it said out loud than because she fully believed it. I'm going to make sure of it. She picked up every contract she could find, a deck expansion in Nepean, a xeriscaping consultation for a small business park near Bell's Corners, a planting report for a school board working group. The pay was modest. She invoiced the moment a project was complete, and spent the waiting time applying for anything else she could find. She ate Darlene's leftovers and split the grocery bill, and did not think about what Craig was doing with Vanessa on that rooftop terrace. 3 weeks before her due date, she was sitting at her angled desk at 7 in the evening, reviewing comments on the school board report, when an email arrived from a name she hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Mitchell Rowe, Senior Project Coordinator with the National Capital Commission. She had worked with him briefly on a small interpretive trail project. During the summer she was finishing her master's degree. He had been methodical and precise, and near the end of the contract he had told her that her approach to integrating topography with pedestrian flow was one of the better things he'd seen come out of a graduate student. She'd thanked him and moved on and assumed he'd forgotten her entirely. The email was 2 paragraphs. The NCC was accepting design proposals for the Greenbelt Renewal Initiative, a phased redevelopment of nearly 40 kilometers of federally protected land on the western edge of the capital. It was the largest public green space project in the country in a generation. They were running an open call, but Mitchell's supervisor had asked him to reach out directly to designers whose past work showed a particular sensitivity to natural corridor systems. He had thought of her. Would she be interested? Leanne read the email 3 times. She wrote back, yes. She wrote the proposal over the next 11 days, working around her swollen ankles and the pressure in her lower back, and the way her daughter had taken to pressing her feet directly into Leanne's ribs sometime around 9 each evening. She worked in the mornings before Darlene's kids woke up. She worked during nap times. She worked at night with a heating pad wedged behind her and a glass of water going warm on the desk. She submitted the proposal on a Thursday afternoon, and 4 days later went into labor. Darlene drove her to the Civic Hospital. It was a February night, the kind in Ottawa, where the cold doesn't so much settle as press, coming through the windows, coming under the doors, making every breath feel deliberate. Leanne sat in the passenger seat with her coat open because she couldn't stand the pressure of it across her belly and watched the streetlights slide past without speaking. She didn't cry until they were in the parking garage, where she sat in the stopped car for 30 seconds, and allowed herself exactly that. Then she wiped her face and got out. Her daughter was born at 6:42 the following morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark eyes squinting against the light of a room her father had never seen. Leanne held her against her chest and felt something she had not felt since the night Craig left. The particular certainty that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to tell you what your life is worth. She named her Piper. 3 weeks later, still at Darlene's, still waking twice in the night, still answering emails one-handed while Piper nursed, Leanne received a second email from Mitchell Rowe. Her proposal had been shortlisted. 6 weeks after that, it was selected. The Greenbelt Renewal Initiative was valued at $28 million over 4 phases. Leanne's firm, which at that precise moment was Leanne and a freelance environmental consultant she'd collaborated with twice and trusted completely, was named as lead design contractor. There would be a formal announcement, a press event. CBC Ottawa had already asked for a segment. Leanne sat on the edge of Darlene's couch, with Piper asleep in the crook of one arm and the confirmation email open on her phone, and did not move for a very long time. Then she put the phone face down on the cushion beside her, pressed her lips to the top of Piper's head, and cried in a way she had been carefully preventing herself from doing since the night Craig walked out. Not from joy exactly. From the specific disorienting feeling of a door slamming shut in one room while a wall in another simply dissolved, like the same month had taken everything from her and handed back something she hadn't known how to ask for. The press event was on a Tuesday morning in early May. The tulips along the canal were fully open. Leanne wore a gray blazer over a navy dress and held Piper against her shoulder and shook hands with the Minister of Environment and the NCC's chief executive and a woman from the mayor's office whose name she immediately forgot. A journalist from The Citizen asked how she'd managed to develop a proposal of that scope while navigating a significant life transition. Leanne looked at the camera and said, "I had no choice but to keep going, so I kept going." That evening, the quote ran as a pullout in the online edition. Across town, Craig Mercer was sitting at the bar of a restaurant in West Borough. He'd been coming to more often lately, half watching the television mounted above the back shelf, while Vanessa picked through a charcuterie board and talked about a colleague who had said something thoughtless in a meeting. Craig was thinking vaguely about the second credit card he'd started using for gas and whether Vanessa had noticed that he'd stopped suggesting restaurants with valet parking. The local news segment came on. He heard the name before he saw the face. Leanne Harford. He turned toward the screen and stopped hearing whatever Vanessa was saying. Leanne was standing in front of the project site in her gray blazer, Piper against her shoulder, gesturing toward a topographic rendering mounted behind her. The lower third caption read, "Greenbelt Renewal Initiative, 28M federal contract." The anchor's voice rose. Harford, 34, a landscape architect based in Ottawa, says she submitted the winning proposal from a spare room while preparing for the birth of her first child. Craig's glass was halfway to his mouth. He set it down without drinking. "Is that your wife?" Vanessa said. He couldn't answer. "Craig." Her voice had gone careful. "Is that Leanne?" He didn't sleep that night. He lay in Vanessa's apartment and stared at the ceiling and replayed the broadcast. The blazer, the baby, the $28 million. The way Leanne had looked at the camera, not triumphant, not performing, just clear. Like a woman who had already moved past needing to explain herself to anyone. He had called her work a hobby. He had called their child a debt they couldn't carry. He had stood in his own kitchen and looked his pregnant wife in the face and decided she wasn't worth the inconvenience of staying. By morning he had convinced himself it wasn't too late. "I need to call her," he said, sitting at Vanessa's kitchen island, already reaching for his phone. Vanessa was standing in the doorway in her robe, holding a coffee mug, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Call who?" "Leanne, I made a mistake. I need her to know I understand that now." Vanessa said nothing for a moment. Then she set her mug down on the counter with a quiet, deliberate click. You want to go back because she's suddenly worth $28 million. It's not about the money. Craig. It's not. It is entirely about the money. She wasn't angry, that was the part that landed hardest. She was just tired. Go ahead and call her, but do us both the courtesy of being honest about why. She was right, and he knew she was right, and he called anyway. Leanne's number went directly to a message saying the mailbox was full. He tried the landline he'd written down years ago for her parents' house. Disconnected. He found Darlene's number through a mutual contact and left a message that went unanswered for 4 days. Until Darlene called back from a number he didn't recognize and said, very evenly, "She doesn't want to hear from you. Please stop trying." He sent flowers to the NCC project office, care of Leanne Harford. They came back with a sticky note from the front desk. Not accepted. Return to sender. He wrote a message to her firm's general inbox. An auto-confirmed receipt. Nothing else came. Leanne had not built a wall around herself. She had simply stopped leaving a door. What came apart next came apart quickly. The way things do when the only thing holding them together was the momentum of wanting something else. Vanessa ended things in June. Not dramatically, not with an argument, just with the particular efficiency of a woman who had reassessed and found the investment underperforming. She was seeing someone, a director at a tech company with offices in Gatineau. She wished Craig well and meant it, and handed him a box she had already packed. He was back in a rental apartment in Centertown by July. Small place on the second floor, the kind of building where the elevator was unreliable, and the walls between units let through everything. He'd taken on a second contract to cover the rent and the debt that had been building since before he left Leanne. And then the company holding his first contract announced a restructure in September and let 15 people go. Craig's name was on the list. He sat in a coffee shop on Elgin Street on a Wednesday afternoon with his laptop open and his savings account on the screen and tried to calculate how long he could last. The number wasn't large. He picked up freelance work where he could, a few structural assessments for a small firm in Gloucester, some review work for a friend of a friend. It covered most things. It didn't cover enough. He thought about Leanne constantly, not the way he'd thought about her when he'd left, as a complication, a set of obligations that exceeded what he'd agreed to. He thought about her the way you think about something you let slip through your hands while you were looking somewhere else. With the slow clarifying weight of understanding exactly what it was, only after it's gone. He thought about the Sunday morning she'd spread project drawings across the kitchen table and talked him through them, like she was sharing something she genuinely loved. The night she'd first told him she was pregnant and the way her entire face had changed, lit from somewhere underneath, before she saw his expression and went careful again. The last 2 words she'd said to him before the door closed, "Not me," said without anger, said like a statement of fact by someone who had finished waiting to be proven wrong. "I threw it all away," he admitted to himself one night, sitting on the edge of the rental bed with the city noise coming through the thin walls. "I threw away the whole thing and called it a problem." Months passed. He found steadier contract work eventually, enough to keep the apartment, enough to stop checking his balance every morning. He stopped sending messages that Leanne never answered. He told himself he'd made peace with it. Then in March, a colleague forwarded him a tender notice for multidiscipline engineering input on a federal green space project in the West End. The company coordinating the landscape design work was listed as Harford Environmental Design Limited. He stared at the name for a long time. He did not submit a tender. 3 days later he drove past the project site anyway, told himself he was curious, told himself it was more or less on his way, and slowed without stopping when he saw the crew gathered near the temporary site office. He didn't see Leanne, he kept driving. A week after that, a subcontractor he'd worked with years ago mentioned, without any awareness of the context, that the lead landscape designer on the Greenbelt project came through the site every Thursday morning for walkthroughs. Craig told himself he needed to stop by the following Thursday for something related to site access documentation. It was not a complete lie, it was not the reason he went. He was standing near the site trailer when the black SUV came through the gate. The rear door opened, Leanne stepped out. He knew in the moment he saw her that he should not have come. He understood it with the kind of clarity that arrives exactly too late to be useful, and he understood it even more completely when she turned and saw him across the gravel lot. And her face moved through 3 things quickly: recognition, something that might have been pain, and then a flatness that was worse than either. She handed Piper to the woman who had climbed out of the front seat, her assistant, he'd later learn, and walked across the gravel toward him, not quickly, not slowly, the way a person walks when they've already decided what they're going to say, and don't need the extra steps to prepare it. He met her halfway, and then couldn't find a single thing to say that wasn't inadequate. Leanne. His voice was already breaking in a way he hadn't expected and couldn't stop. I know I have no reason to ask you to listen to me, I know that. But I need you to know that I understand what I did. I understand what I said and what I walked away from, and I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back. I just need you to know that I see it, I see all of it now. She stood in front of him and let him finish. She didn't cross her arms, she didn't look past him. She looked at him steadily. The way a person looks at something they've already thought all the way through. You called our daughter a debt, she said. Her voice was even, quiet. You stood in our kitchen and told me that we were holding you back. You didn't fight for us. You didn't say you were scared. You didn't ask for help or try to find another way. You packed a bag and you left. No. The contract didn't change that. She held his gaze without effort. The press coverage didn't change that. The money, she paused for half a second, the way a person pauses when they want to be precise. The money is what it is. But I was the exact same person the morning after the announcement that I was the night you walked out. Same work, same capability, same values. You didn't see it then because you weren't looking, and I can't give you credit now for seeing it because a government contract finally made it legible to you. I know that's the truth, he said. I don't hate you, Craig. She said it plainly, with nothing performed behind it. I genuinely don't. I think you're someone who made a choice he believed was rational and discovered too late that it wasn't. That's going to take you a while to work through. I hope you do work through it. I hope you find something real to build. She looked at him a moment longer, then she shook her head, gently, with something close to sadness but not quite. But whatever you build, it doesn't run through me, and it doesn't run through her. She glanced back at Piper, who had crouched down in the gravel to examine something with complete serious focus. One small fist closed around a pebble. She's going to grow up knowing exactly what she's worth, Leanne said. And she's going to learn that from a mother who knew what she was worth before anyone else did. Before the announcement, before the project, before any of it. She looked at Craig once more. That's the only thing I want her to have. She turned and walked back across the gravel. The site crew had found better places to look, equipment checks, clipboard reviews, the urgent necessity of being elsewhere in that particular moment. The assistant scooped Piper up with easy, practiced motion. The SUV's engine was still running. Leanne, Craig said once to her back without expecting anything. She kept walking. She reached the site trailer steps, glanced at something on her phone and went inside. The door swung shut. A few minutes later, from where he was standing in the gravel, he could hear the low murmur of a project meeting beginning. Schedules, phases, deliverables, the specific cadence of people, building something real in a room he was not part of. Craig stood there for a long time. The crew worked around him without comment. Eventually he folded the site plan he'd been holding and put it back in his jacket pocket. Eventually he walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. He'd spent months calculating what he'd lost once the money appeared, adding up the contract value like it was the precise measure of his mistake, as if the number on the announcement were what had made it real. As if before the cameras and the press release, it had been somehow abstract, theoretical, forgivable. But sitting outside the project she had built from a spare room in Kanata, from 11 days of work done around a pregnancy and a heating pad and a glass of water going warm, he understood, finally and completely, that the number had never been the point. She would have stood beside him through anything. He knew that now, in the specific, irreversible way, you know something only after you've made it impossible. She had been someone who showed up, not when conditions were right, not when it was convenient, but as a matter of who she was, the way water finds the ground. Patient, quietly unstoppable. He had looked at all of that and called it a burden. He had been so entirely, completely wrong. He started the car and drove back through the west end of the city, past the canal, past streets that looked unchanged and ordinary. Somewhere behind him, on a stretch of federal land that had been overlooked for 20 years, Leanne Harford was in a site trailer talking through everything she intended to build next. She would build it. There had never been a single reason to doubt that. It was, in the end, the thing he had understood about her least, and the thing that had been truest all along.